Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll get started in just a minute here. Just a reminder that this webinar will be recorded. And for those who have questions, please feel free to use the questions option in the panel you have in front of you, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the session. For those who would like to follow up with us afterwards, please send us an email at imtweb@imt.org. Thank you, and we'll get started shortly. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just about a minute here. And just a reminder that the webinar will be recorded, and you can add your questions throughout in the questions panel, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end of the session. All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is on how cities building performance policies create energy efficiency data that utilities can use. So just a brief reminder, the webinar will be recorded. If you have questions, please feel free to leave those in the question box. We'll get to those at the end of the session. And please feel free to follow up afterwards. If you have additional questions, we will provide contact information. So just by way of introduction, my name is Kelly Crandall. I'm the manager of state and local policy for the Institute for Market Transformation. And we are a nonprofit whose mission is to catalyze demand for high-performing buildings. And in my work, I work closely with both city staff and their utility partners to achieve local goals around energy efficiency and clean energy. So IMTs Work involves engaging both the private and public sectors. And in the private sector, we work with building owners, landlords, and tenants to address efficiency barriers and increase demand. And in the public sector, we help cities develop robust local markets for energy efficiency through policies that reduce market barriers. So an overview of today's webinar, I'll start with providing a little bit of context for what we'll be talking about. And then I'm pleased to turn it over to our four esteemed panelists who represent different sectors, including utility energy efficiency program administration, energy service providers, and local government. Next, we'll have a roundtable discussion around a series of questions that helps address some of the different ways that our speakers use data and how they might use data. And then at the end, we'll leave some time for audience questions. So to provide a little bit of context, today's webinar is going to look at some of the ways that cities, utilities, and energy service providers can use the data that emerges when cities implement building energy performance policies. Now, these policies require public and private sector building owners to take certain actions to better understand how their buildings use energy, certain steps like obtaining information, sometimes particular actions. Many of these policies involve benchmarking and transparency. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with benchmarking, it involves comparing buildings by characteristics like type and occupancy, and then seeing how they stack up in terms of their energy and water efficiency. So where benchmarking is required, the results may be disclosed publicly on lists or maps in order to make information on how buildings are performing more readily available to building owners in the real estate market. So the theory at work is that building owners can use information about energy consumption to make informed decisions about energy management. Local governments can take the results of building benchmarking and use that to invest in activities that drive energy efficiency improvements, things like training, qualified contractor lists, outreach. And local governments can then share the results of building benchmarking with the public. so that market actors can compare properties and factor energy efficiency into leasing and investment decisions. So this process then encourages building owners to make their properties more efficient and desirable, and it's a feedback loop that helps build a robust market for energy efficiency. At the local level, there are currently 24 cities and 2 counties that have policies that require benchmarking for private sector buildings, and that includes commercial, multifamily, and institutional space, totaling around 11 billion square feet. Often these policies are covering larger buildings, so above 50,000 square feet, although a number of cities cover buildings as small as 5,000 or 10,000 square feet. And in addition to benchmarking and transparency, 11 of these cities have also instituted requirements that go beyond that and may include audits or retrocommissioning. So these are steps like audits provide more specific information about energy conservation measures that might be cost effective for the building owner, or in the case of retrocommissioning, it can lead to direct energy savings because building owners are tuning up their equipment so that it works in accordance with how it was designed. So as we'll discuss throughout this webinar, these policies create types of data that are being used or have the potential to be used in different ways to drive energy efficiency. So what you'll hear today is discussion about how this information from building performance policies and related to building performance policies can be used. And we'll focus on a couple of emerging use cases. So one related to more getting participation, outreach, lead generation, and another looking more on the program design side. So new products, refining the types of measures that are offered in efficiency programs, and so forth. And just a final word for context, this work draws on and builds on results from a project we recently completed called Putting Data to Work, which was a city-level pilot project to use benchmarking data to design and pilot energy efficiency programs. And in the process, we partnered with the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability and the DC Department of Energy and Environment and their partners. And earlier this year, we published a toolkit that has a number of resources for energy efficiency program administrators, cities, utilities, and other stakeholders. So I hope you'll take a look and that you'll find them useful. You can download one of the documents that's related to this presentation through your GoToWebinar panel under handouts. So next, I will turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and their organizations. They're each going to share a bit about the types of data that they use and that emerged from or are related to benchmarking or beyond benchmarking policies. And after that, we'll move into a roundtable discussion. So we will start with Emily.
Thanks so much, Kelly. As Kelly had said, my name is Emily Pearce. I'm Vice President at Waypoint Energy. I've been working in energy efficiency for almost 15 years with a background in business prior to joining the energy efficiency world. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a perpetual episode of Portlandia, living on an urban farm with far too many chickens for my own good. And a little bit about Waypoint Energy is that we're a division of Waypoint Building Group. We're a small women-owned business based in San Francisco. We have employees across the United States, and what we do is develop and manage private and public utility programs throughout the U.S. to improve energy efficiency within commercial, industrial, and multifamily markets. Specifically, we try to focus on bridging the gaps between the commercial real estate market and utilities. Our mission is really to increase the performance and transparency and penetration of sustainability and energy efficiency programs in the built environment. And speaking more towards how we're using building performance data and benchmarking data, we're using that almost daily in our utility programs that we help manage. It's really become one of the most important pieces of information that we can leverage when helping buildings for those who own, manage, and operate them to implement more energy efficiency measures and programs. We also manage several utility programs that include some sort of benchmarking component, whether it's been mandated or not, because what we're finding is the benchmarking data, and more importantly, the results and conclusions that we derive from that benchmarking data have really helped create transparency and identify and substantiate for ownership moving forward with energy efficiency and sustainability efforts.
Thank you, Emily. And I will turn it to Ben.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Heymer with Seventhwave. I'm a professional engineer and technical director for our Chicago office. We implement the ComEd new construction energy efficiency programs here in Northern Illinois, and for the work that I'm about to talk to you about, we also are partnered with the Department of Energy. So I've got a couple of slides that I'd like to share just to set this up. Really, I'll be talking to you about new construction. The most obvious use for deploying, benchmarking data and other types of data is in existing buildings, but we're using this heavily to influence the way that new buildings are built. That's important because it's, we're putting enormous resources into these new buildings, and it's important to get them right. And not every building is able to achieve zero energy level. So as kind of a step to use the same integrative design process and benefits from the zero energy approach, but deploying that to a broader category of buildings in the new construction market. So focusing on actual, real, measurable performance targets that folks can design to. We use the benchmarking data heavily to do that, and hopefully everyone can see the web address on the screen here. I'll have this up for a minute so you have a chance to jot this down. But this is a free tool that we've developed as part of this project that everyone's allowed or free to use for whatever purpose they desire. And barring any technical difficulties, I'll also bring that up on the screen in just a minute. But really, we're using this existing benchmarking data to highlight the issue that we have in the industry, which is that we're not really designing better buildings than we have been over the last 100 years. Maybe incrementally so, but for all the success that the green building movement has had in improving awareness about building design and achieving sustainability, the energy results just aren't showing that those activities are having a significant impact, along with codes and other things that are driving people to make energy efficiency decisions. So it's important that we try something a little bit new in our approach to procuring buildings. So we're using this data, we're using concept energy models, and we're increasing our incentive levels for buildings that are willing to take this approach, and using this data to build confidence in the targets that we're setting and help people reach these higher levels of performance. And this is the tool that we're using, and basically the process is such that you can come in here. We have several different data sets available. So Illinois, Boston, Minneapolis, a lot of these cities that have adopted benchmarking ordinances, we've incorporated into this tool. We have the ability to filter by building type, and unlike some other similar things, we also show you all the microdata. So here's addresses and dates and everything that's available for those buildings. And so you have the ability to have some basic plotting functions here. Here we're just looking at office buildings in Chicago by EUI and by year built. Also looking at some specific targets like what an Energy Star office would look like, or what an ASHRAE max achievable level of performance looks like. And from there, we're able to plot something like a client's existing buildings that may not be incorporated into the benchmarking data. We can plot the results of our concept models, and this really helps us focus in on a range of possible EUI targets for a new project. And from there, we're encouraging our clients to use a competitive process, to use integrated project delivery, and also financial guarantees to get design teams to really respond to these targets and use their creativity and their experience to do that in a really high value way. So doing all that value engineering and really focused energy engineering up front. So again,
Great.
please feel free to check that out.
Thank you, Ben. So next I'll introduce Jean.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jean Ascoli, and I am a Senior Energy Efficiency Program Manager for ComEd. We are the energy efficiency, we are the electric provider for the delivery of electricity here in the northern part of Illinois. We serve roughly the northern third of the state. I am a manager for all of the new construction program offerings. We implement through Seventhwave, where Ben works, and that includes new construction and affordable housing program, new construction for commercial and industrial, for public sector, for affordable housing, as well as residential programs. My background is that I am a licensed architect here in Illinois, and spent the first 2/3 of my career as a practicing architect, sort of witnessing what Ben was describing as a very well-intended profession sort of stumbling on itself over and over in the delivery of energy-efficient projects. So the last 10 years, I've been directly engaged in energy efficiency in one form or another, from designing net zero home to helping to deliver energy efficiency programs from the implementation side to my most recent role as program manager here at ComEd. As far as the information that Ben just presented, we were the first utility to roll out an offering using the Accelerate Performance option, which is the option that uses this benchmarking data. And most recently, we are considering an expansion of use of benchmarking data in our approach to new construction, particularly on the commercial program side. Next slide. So as far as our portfolio, as I mentioned, I manage these new construction programs, but we do have a portfolio that is very robust, and really there are many ways where, and I'll talk about this later in the roundtable, where we see opportunities for using the benchmarking data that's available out there. The program as a whole, the portfolio as a whole, on the commercial side, we have facility assessments. We do specialized approach in technical assistance for various building types, including healthcare and laboratories and data centers. We have a combined heat and power program, and we do offer significant technical assistance through the new construction offering. And then we have obviously some incentives that we administer as well, both standard and custom programs. We also have the new construction program, as I mentioned, and a small business program. There's also many midstream offerings, the business discounts program and lighting discounts program. And then as far as optimizing buildings, we have our retro commissioning offerings. We do a rooftop unit program, a compressed air program. And finally, we do have energy analysis tool available. It is strictly for their electric usage, though, and so I will again talk to how city benchmarking data can provide even more information. But we do have a tool that is available to all of our customers that can get down to that granular level of hourly operation to help them understand the performance of their particular building.
Thank you, Jean. And finally, let's turn to Allie.
Hi, my name is Allie Levine. I'm with the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and my role primarily is to manage the Retrofit Accelerator program, which is a program that really provides one-on-one assistance for owners, operators, condo and co-op board members in privately owned buildings to do energy efficiency projects. And so in New York, we're in 2009, we passed a series of pieces of legislation, one being the whole building benchmarking of energy and water usage for buildings over 50,000 square feet, about 12,000 buildings, as well as a requirement to do an energy audit and retro commissioning every 10 years. And so we found that while this data has been really useful, people weren't necessarily actually doing a lot of the recommendations in the energy audit. So we developed the Retrofit Accelerator to actually help people take advantage of that, of the information that they were actually getting from their energy audits and benchmarking results. And so within the program, we really rely on this data to be a launching pad for actually implementation of projects. And we use the benchmarking also to show how people are doing relative to each other, as well as identify who are the best kind of targets for the program. As a city, this data has been incredibly valuable to actually create policy, to identify which segments are, have the most opportunity both in energy usage and their system type. It's also translated into a new piece of legislation that passed around energy grades that relies on the benchmarking data. And finally, we're able to do a lot of analysis that helps us focus our outreach around certain systems that use a lot of energy, and that's where we've done a lot of our coordination with the utilities, but which I'll talk about a bit later in this panel.
Thank you, Allie. And so we'll turn to discussion questions, and starting with a couple of areas. I do want to mention to the panelists as you answer the questions, if you could try to be concrete about the type of data you're referring to, if it's Energy Star scores, energy use intensity, so results from benchmarking versus results from an audit, that sort of thing. I think that'll be helpful as we work through this. So let's start with some additional discussion on why and how these types of data are useful. So starting with Emily, in your experience, what motivates utilities to explore how to use these types of data associated with benchmarking?
Sure. I think partly there's a few reasons. One, because they have to put it kind of bluntly, is that times have changed regarding what kind of data utilities are compiling on their customers, and those times are happening very fast. Those changes are happening in rapid pace, and customers are asking for more data. They want whole building usage data. They want their meter data. They want it now. They want it in intervals of 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Well, they want that information, and honestly, utilities are expected to meet that demand. So it's great because utilities are starting to meet that demand, and some more than others. And there's also more tools and resources on the market where those customers can use that data. And so it allows these utilities to engage with their customers at a different kind of level than they had before. It's a value add. And they're starting to realize that, and have realized, a lot of them, is that they can use it as part of their business model and they can help meet a business need. And there's also a huge benefit coming out of whole building data that utilities can actually use to their own advantage. What a motivator, that they can better understand their customer segments, better target the major users, and they can also help identify energy efficiency measures. Kind of a win-win for both sides.
Thank you. And Jean, has that been a similar experience for you, or are there other things that you can add?
Sure. I mean, I would characterize it somewhat differently in the sense that, it's absolutely correct that the data is available, and utilities have, to some extent, been using internally. They've been using our, at least I can speak for ComEd. We've been using our own energy use data system for quite some time, and it becomes more robust as we've rolled out our AMI meter program, giving us much more access to provide data back to our customers. And as I mentioned, we have a tool that we allow our customers to use. But what motivates us as far as use of the city benchmarking data that is now available in the city of Chicago is that data is much broader than any one individual utility can generally access independently. So for instance, the city of Chicago benchmarking data includes the building size, other utility data, including natural gas use and water use, and building operating characteristics, none of which is data that's actually something that the utility can directly or does directly collect from our customers. There is some some collection of building operating characteristics through our own tool, but it's completely optional. So, you know, it sort of comes down to the data that's going into the system, you know, has a lot more going on in terms of the city's requirements than what the utility currently can require.
Thank you. And so another question is, should utilities be thinking about this data as an opportunity to drive deeper energy savings, or is it more about expanding participation in energy efficiency programs, or might it be both? So Emily, if you could share your perspective.
Yes, certainly. I think the answer to that is both. I think more data really brings more of an understanding about building performance, and it opens up opportunity, both in breadth and depth. So if customers have a better understanding of their energy usage, they're better positioned to reduce that usage in really more meaningful ways. So you've got some customers, not all of them, who have really not paid that much attention to their usage. They pay their utility bill, it's part of their operating costs, that's what happens. But perhaps maybe they have multiple tenants and multiple meters, and it's been very complicated for them. And now we're getting this wonderful place where they're able to make decisions based on actual data at their building that's very actionable, where they can partner with their utility to make better decisions about how they're using their energy, and hopefully participating in utility incentive programs. So I would say yes to both, is that utilities should definitely consider benchmarking data as an opportunity to drive deeper savings and increased participation in their programs.
Thank you. And Jean, you may want to address that too, but I also have a question for you in terms of whether your sense is if benchmarking data can create any cost savings by reducing something like our outreach or marketing costs, or if that's something that you might be exploring in the future, or if it's too soon to tell.
Sure. Well, I'll kind of address both. You know, having this data available from the city has already sort of generated the ability to have kinds of discussions with customers about their usage relative to other users in the city and many of the customers that we've talked to in outreach, in spite of the great efforts that the city has made to sort of publicize this, until we're in conversation with them, many of them are not even aware, even though you know, their facilities people may have filed this data. The folks that are actually doing development, that own the buildings, sometimes don't even know that this is out there, that their buildings are pegged on a map. And as Ben mentioned in his presentation, we're able to take that information and not only help them see where they stand across the Chicago region, you know, because that's the limited data set there, but also begin to have that larger conversation where they may be a holder of properties across the country. We may be able to talk to them about building performance benchmarking using the commercial building energy consumption survey data, or benchmarking from other cities, to really help them narrow in on the kind of building that they're building, again, from the new construction perspective, and massage that, you know, information and that conversation based on a lot more data available to them than was, say, even 10 years ago. We certainly are looking into the opportunities for cost savings. We've been approached about doing a sort of more in-depth study to determine if there's cost savings. We recognize that, you know, being able to have the city provide that data and directly, you know, have it accessible to our outreach service providers, we know immediately gives them sort of a way to talk to customers, as I said, that is new and different. But as far as sort of a direct incorporation of the data into our programs, it's a little too soon for us to tell. We you know, in talking across other program managers here at ComEd, what I found is even within our own organization, there was a little bit of a lack of understanding of what the data could provide that was different than what we could get, again, from our own energy use data system. But as that understanding begins to expand, I think we'll see more use of it. I do know that many of our very savvy outreach service providers for programs like our retro commissioning program and other retrofit kinds of programs have already been definitely using the data to help them identify leads to customers who are using, whose usage is quite high.
Thank you. And Emily, have you had any experience in that area in terms of looking at the cost savings?
Sure, I have, yes. And I just want to, I'd agree with what Jean's saying there. And as one of the people who do a lot of that implementing, as our company does that, we've seen a huge benefit of leveraging the benchmarking data, and just specifically a lot of that is the Energy Star Portfolio Manager data, and then also an actual true benchmarking exercise, and also energy audits, just like making sure using any of the information that can help you nail down who the right customer is, and then having information that's specific to either their building portfolio or their specific one building that they're trying to put their efforts into goes miles, because it essentially allows you to become more efficient in your outreach, therefore hopefully creating some dollar savings. And I think when you have a customer segment, like let's say commercial real estate, which is very much based on relationships and trust, the more information that you have that helps unveil something for them that they may not have understood, or something that even you just want to put it in front of them to reinvigorate a conversation, as Jean was mentioning, some of the outreach managers and providers out there, it just gives you something to talk about. Therefore, you're not wasting people's time, and hopefully you're enjoying some of the cost benefits of that. I think it's hard to put math to that. I think it's somewhat of a non-tangible, but I think over time, as benchmarking becomes more and more mandatory, and people are seeing more and more of the value, there might be some value in backwards mathing all the other wonderful benefits from that, other than the direct ones, most we talked about today.
Well, thank you. Let me switch gears for us, and we can talk a little bit more about how cities and utilities can partner around leveraging data that comes out of building performance policies. So I'd like to start with Allie. How have you found that cities can help utilities to engage building owners around efficiency?
Sure. So through the Retrofit Accelerator, we are a city program, so we are neutral as to fuel source, as to types of projects. We're not necessarily limited to what is in utility programs, but we have the opportunity, obviously, to take advantage of, or to help our customers take advantage of utility incentives. And as I'm sure many of us have seen, and we do run into this sometimes, there is somewhat of a program fatigue, or even from contractors that kind of come to our participants, that they're a little weary of what they're offering. And so through the Retrofit Accelerator, we're able to act as kind of a third-party, unbiased advisor to help people understand what their options are, help them understand energy efficiency as a whole, and then guide them to the available incentives through the utilities. And so over the nearly 3 years of this program, we've developed a really close relationship with our local utilities to have a good process for making referrals to directly to them, making sure that we deeply understand the entire process. We're aware of any funding cycles that the programs might have, and in return, we obviously drive leads to their programs. And so we've been able also to bring back some feedback from on the ground in New York City, what people need, what they're interested in. We've done a couple of joint events together. In fact, we have one next week where we're hosting, and utilities in the state are actually coming. So we've been able to build that trust both with the utilities and our participants to actually work together to accomplish all of our goals.
Thank you. And Jean, is there anything you can add on this front?
Well, sure. I mean, we're a little behind on the partnership side. We have seen some proposals to establish, city-led outreach, as Allie was describing. And I think the idea is that customers might, first of all, they would sort of get information across more than one utility. which obviously has benefit for the customer, because if they're only getting information sort of from one side of the equation, and they've got both natural gas and electric usage. But and there's also, I think, the sense that I've, from the materials I've read about this option, that, customers potentially would see the city or the city's contractor as being more of a neutral party than the utility itself. Utilities running energy efficiency programs, continue to this day, in spite of the fact that they've been around now for many years and decades in some states, to have a certain level of apprehension in not understanding why the utility would want to help them save energy. Whereas the city, especially cities that have set specific climate change goals or other kinds of goals, have just a different driver. So there's a different understanding when they would approach. So we are, we're considering it, but ultimately it's too soon for us to make the call. But I do see myself personally some value in the relationship for sure.
And turning back to Allie, do you find that having access to data about different types of end uses and building characteristics have helped you level up in your relationship with your utility? And if you could talk a little bit about the types of data and why that's been helpful.
Certainly, and I just want to speak quickly to June about what our drivers are, and part of it is that we did just develop this program because of our greenhouse gas reduction goals, and so we were able to spend time with different types of customers that are across the city, and also focus in on certain upgrade types that have much deeper greenhouse gas emission savings. So getting to your question, we have found that having access to the end uses, so this is from our local, what we call Local Law 87, our energy auditing and retro commissioning data. We did a very large analysis back in 2016 of all of the buildings that had submitted energy audit data, what systems they have, what their energy use was by end type, and found that nearly 3/4 of our greenhouse gas emissions in large buildings come from generating domestic hot water and space heating. And at the same time, 70% of those buildings have steam heating distribution systems, not district steam, but boilers on site. And so, so as a result, so this is the aggregated data, not necessarily individual buildings, but as a result, we looked at that and said, we need to make a change. We need to make sure that these systems work better. We know a lot that these systems are older, often haven't been updated, and we decided to basically build a campaign, we call it Better Steam Heat, around that upgrade. And as we were developing the campaign, we went to utilities and said, this is what we would like to do outreach around. How can we work together to have a package of incentives, an easy way to get this done? And at the same time, some of our utilities are, have done filings around gas constraints and, basically non-pipeline solutions to gas reduction. So it's something, reducing natural gas use is really of interest to our utilities as well. So all of those were able to come together to actually work together to, we did a lot of outreach around to buildings that have these systems, while also developing a contractor market that didn't exist before, and training them in coordination with our utilities, who then, we've had over 100 buildings actually go through, do a comprehensive steam system upgrade with the utility as a result of this campaign. And so we, having that end use and really understanding what the biggest impact in the city could be from both the greenhouse gas and energy reduction has been really useful for taking that relationship to the next level. And that big analysis has also become a discussion point with utilities as they're designing new incentives, as they're looking at packages of measures. We're able to use the analysis of different energy conservation measures, different end uses, to actually figure out what's the most impactful, and then do outreach together or at least, in parallel, and make sure that we're not overlapping as well.
Thank you, Allie. Let me turn to a couple of additional questions on looking toward the future. So the first is, are there data quality issues that you're finding with benchmarking data, so flaws in calculations of Energy Star scores, EUIs, or other sort of data quality gaps or issues that need to be fixed to make this maximally useful? And maybe let's start with Ben.
Yeah, sure. Well, I know this data is not perfect. For example, the data set for the benchmarking in Boston lists one building having been built in the year 1000, which I'm quite sure is not true. Similarly, we sometimes see buildings with like a EUI of 8,000. So, we know that there's probably some conversion error issues here. I know in Chicago, there's, you need a professional engineer or other kind of certification to sign off on the submittal of this type of data. So there are some quality control checks in there, but again, it's not perfect. You have to use a grain of salt when looking at this stuff, and our tool helps you kind of filter some of those bad data points out. Thankfully, there's enough buildings that I think the medians and averages and general conclusions you can draw from this are still pretty good.
And Allie, is there anything you can add to that?
Sure. So, in the first few years of the benchmarking submission for buildings over 50,000 square feet, we did find that there were a decent number of just completely missing fields, but initially we didn't actually issue violations for that, just if there was non-submittal. More recently, the city has actually been issuing violations if there are important fields missing, so that's really helped with filling out some of the data. But we did see in the analysis of the first few years that when cleaning and analyzing that, we did have to drop quite a few submissions. As Ben said, we're finding that the sample size was big enough that the averages were pretty accurate. Also noting that we recently updated the legislation so that buildings 25,000 to 50,000 square feet will start submitting, and we've been working with the utilities to actually come up with an automatic data upload system that isn't up just yet, but we'll have that data in by next year, and we'll probably have to deal with some of these similar issues, but hopefully that system will make it a bit easier. Outside of the benchmarking, the local law 87, our energy audit data, we did have, it's not just a data issue, it's a bit of a quality issue in both the audits and the data. And so for those, we were finding that, sometimes we'd find the same building a couple of times, even though they were completely different sizes. For example, the submissions would look the same, or the recommendations didn't make a whole lot of sense. And so we started doing basically a sample audit of all of the audits. And we did see the quality get a lot better since then. And now we're moving to use an energy audit tool, the building thing from DOE. And so that tool should really standardize our data. And having that, I think, will greatly improve what we're getting out of the audits. And we're concerned with it both from an analysis standpoint and because we want people to get the best quality audit that they can so that they can really act on it as best as possible.
Thank you. And I think, Jean, you wanted to add on this point?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, I've been looking at benchmarking data in some form for all of the time that I've worked in energy efficiency, at least 10 years. And as an architect, one of the concerns I noted very early on that I still have questions about has to do with calculation of building square footage. And the reason it's important is that the metric that is used typically to sort of one-for-one compare buildings and their consumption is an energy use intensity, and it's based on square footage. So obviously, if the square footage is calculated differently from building to building, then the data comparison begins to diminish, the quality of that data comparison. And I raise this because back in, several years ago, what I recall doing was, first of all, trying to scour the Energy Star website to find specific direction on how to calculate the square footage, because while it sounds like a pretty straightforward thing, some forms of calculations require you to include the floor levels where there's an atria, or not include their atrium. There's mechanical space is not in, interior wall space is not in. And although initially I wasn't sure how important that was, it actually did result in some pretty big swings in what an energy use intensity for a building would be based on how somebody calculated that square footage. And when you think about it, for a city ordinance where you're requiring individual buildings to provide that information, if you're not very, very careful about how you both stipulate how that's going to be calculated as well as how you check it, I see that as a potential pitfall. So it's not even the data coming out of the utilities, it's the data coming from that building owner.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I don't know if either Allie or Emily has a follow-on that they have for that.
My primary role is to manage the program, so I can't speak to the direction that we give when calculating square footage, but I do know that it is something that comes up fairly regularly because for a couple of reasons. One is that there are often discrepancies between what our Department of Finance has as the square footage, which determines whether they have to benchmark, and what taxes and other things are based on, and then what the conditioned square footage that's often used for UI is. And so, that sometimes makes it difficult to compare different kinds of records that the city collects. And also, EUI is a metric. It is the most standard that we have, but we do recognize that there can be limitations both in how it's calculated and in the kinds of uses of buildings. So it is something that we think about a lot, but I'll have to, if someone is particularly interested, I'll have to go back and talk to some of the people who work more directly on the legislation and guidance as to how we calculate, or how we provide guidance to calculate square footage.
Yeah, thank you. Let me ask a different question, which is for Ben. Are you finding that cities with benchmarking ordinances are more likely to be interested in performance-based procurement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple things there. The first is that having some sort of benchmarking database to work with is almost a prerequisite for considering performance-based procurement. You really need that to highlight the problem that the industry is facing in terms of delivering on real measurable performance. And you also need that to build confidence in the targets that we are setting. It's really important to show building owners that are considering the concept that they're not going to be designing something that's, exotic and unachievable. You have to show them that, they're not reaching for the moon, but they're setting a realistic target that other buildings are able to achieve. So that's one element. And then also, I think there's just a correlation between cities that, are progressive in passing benchmarking ordinances and a building community, a green building community that's sort of committed to high performance design and all the other things that go into that.
And then just a quick follow-up. When you're working with new construction, so looking to set something up contractually to achieve a certain level of energy performance, when are you starting to engage with a building owner on that or developer?
Well, as early as possible. ideally, before any type of design team, architect, or engineer has been hired, we'd like to get at those projects in the planning process or even the zoning process to influence not only the energy efficiency features that they might implement, but also the general form and programming of the building, since clients then have to make some trade-offs between sometimes energy performance and amenities, or aesthetics and energy and all the complexities that need to be considered in design. And we're really finding that very early stage, though it's challenging to find those projects and build trust with those owners kind of at that early stage. That's really when the most value can be delivered, by setting a good direction on those projects early, and then using that the ability to have a competitive process in the selection of the teams and the contractors to get the best value for the owner.
Great, thank you. So I'll ask one other question, which is, I think, similar to one of the questions being asked by our audience, but we'll turn to audience questions in a moment here, which is, as cities are looking at building performance, do you see opportunities for new kinds of data to be leveraged or new kinds of data to be released beyond what's typically being released? And this is a bit open to the panelists.
This is Jean.
Go ahead, Jean.
Okay. So we are working more and more on defining energy savings potential from the energy-water nexus. So the fact that the City of Chicago has, recently added water consumption data will be of increasing value to the utilities, because we can begin to claim savings, not just for water reduction use in terms of the local water heating component of energy, but also the water, pre-processing to deliver potable water. There's energy involved in that, and water reduction resulting in energy savings. So we're excited about that, and look to the future for additional resources coming out of the data.
Great, thank you. So let's go with Allie and then turn to Emily.
I was just going to say, for us, I just want to stress the value that having the audit data, obviously it's valuable for people to now have audits, for their building, but the equipment inventory has been incredibly useful to understand just what is in our buildings. We have so many built at different times, and to understand really just how similar they are and what the opportunities are, and be able to make some generalizations and just to make better policy and provide better assistance going forward. So just want to stress that the importance that has had for our city.
And Allie, could you briefly give an example of a specific type of equipment you would collect information on?
Sure. So the audits that are required are ASHRAE Level 2 audits. So those audits include an equipment inventory of the heating system, cooling system, ventilation, lighting, facade, and their materials, the windows. And so for heating, it would say what the heating source, if it's a boiler, if it's a hot water boiler, steam boiler, CHP, or if it's a district steam system, what kind of fuel it uses, and then what kind of distribution it uses, and the same thing for cooling. Those are only for base building systems. The audit does not include information about the tenant spaces for multifamily, which is a bit of a limitation when looking at end uses, because it probably underestimates cooling. But we also collect the information about the energy conservation measures, but those are a bit more subjective from the auditors. So the equipment inventory has been the most useful to date.
Great, thank you. And Emily?
I just wanted to add regarding new data and new kind of initiatives revolving and involving building data. BOMA has this really interesting new waste and water challenge that they're doing. That when Jean mentioned water metricing at ComEd, kind of rung my bell about that. As customers are looking for more and more information that they can leverage to become more competitive as a building, if you got a building owner or a property manager, they want to help increase their benefits to their tenants. They want to look more attractive in the market. They want to have increased asset value. All this information that they can take together, like managing and benchmarking either their energy use, water, waste, etc., helps them manage all of their operational costs, and then looking at capital projects to increase their efficiencies within their building. So I think as more and more data comes available and as more tools and resources and ideas come up about it, it's just going to be better and better for customers to leverage that information and become more, it's more of a competitive edge for them.
Thank you. And Emily, I think most of our audience is probably going to be familiar with BOMA, but just in case, could you explain who they are, please?
Sure. BOMA is the Building Owners Manager Association, so it's a international association, and this waste and water treatment, waste and water challenge that they're having is for commercial real estate practitioners to essentially benchmark their water and waste consumption. But the organization overall is really a membership-driven organization where there can be advocacy for the commercial real estate space. They can connect different entities, buildings, again, people who own, manage, or operate buildings into different vendors, different resources. They would have stuff like maybe even this kind of webinar would be sent out in an email blast to all of their lots and lots of members. And so probably a lot of you might be familiar with your local BOMA chapters. They're usually local members out of the community. And it's an interesting organization to get involved in because they've got such international and national pull. So it's things like moving the needle forward and coming up with something like a waste and water challenge. Like, wait to see what they come up with in 4 or 5 years. They tend to be ahead of the market. So that's what BOMA does.
Great, thank you. And we have a few minutes left, so I'm seeing a series of audience questions, and I think they're starting to hit on a couple of particular themes. And the first one is, what really encourages utilities to begin providing whole building data? What drives that process? And if a utility is reluctant for some reason, how do you best work with them and help them understand the merits of doing that sort of thing? And so that's partially a question for Jean, and then I think some others on the call may want to feed off of that, but let's start with Jean because some of that was specifically directed to ComEd's motivations.
I apologize, I didn't quite follow the question. Could you recap?
Yeah, the question is, how did ComEd start to partner with cities to provide whole building data? So what was that driven by city request? Was that by customer request, or something ComEd affirmatively did?
Sure. So the city passed the ordinance, and I have to confess I wasn't with ComEd when the ordinance passed. I was working on the implementation side. But my understanding is that, from the very beginning, they partnered with our data folks who, as I mentioned, we already had an energy use data system. So it was really just a matter of working with them, for the city working with them, particularly on buildings with multiple accounts, to get aggregate data for those buildings. But from what I've been told, it was a relatively smooth process, and the utility from early on did recognize the benefit. I can't speak to the gas utility side of that, but I do know that the electric side, and this was information I heard from the outside before I joined the utility, went very smoothly, and the transfer of aggregate data. So there was, for instance, in a multifamily situation, you don't want to identify usage at the apartment level, but the building needs to have total usage, and we were able to provide data and and we're already providing data to building owners that allowed them to understand the usage at the unit level while getting the aggregate data for the whole building.
Thank you. And I wonder if maybe Emily or Ben might have other thoughts on, if a utility isn't doing this already, what's the most persuasive argument to help them understand the benefits of providing energy usage information to building owners?
I'll go first. I think one of the biggest benefits is that building owners really care about where they stand in the marketplace. So, any conversation about energy efficiency is augmented by, someone who really cares about it. And I've found that in all of our discussions with people, whether it be existing buildings or new buildings, people really do care where they stand. I think people see that the market is changing and preferences are changing, both for building owners and tenants and financiers even. So it's a motivating factor, even if it's not directly used in any program.
Sure, and this is Emily. I'll just chime in. I can chime in super briefly. I think what utilities are going to end up finding out, whether if they haven't already, is that customers are going to start asking for this information. And so, just again, coming back to the BOMAs of the world, there's a lot of different building-oriented organizations that are going to start pushing for this at more of a local level, as opposed to just on a national level, and looking at the different places that already have benchmarking mandates. Even if it's not mandated, there's a real benefit for utilities to get ahead of this information and start helping their customers leverage it, because it's going to lead to more participation in their programs, and it's going to help keep customers very, very happy, as opposed to making it feel like it's a forced effort or they're being mandated to do something. Joining forces with some of these buildings ahead of time to help craft policy is a great way to build some trust with your customers and have a win-win at the end of it.
Thank you, Emily. And we're going to have to wrap up in just a second, but let me ask one additional question. So a couple of members of our audience have asked whether cities and utilities are using other software to provide benchmarking on energy performance other than Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is a free EPA tool. And is that based on whether there are limitations to Energy Star or gaps or anything like that? And I think, well, I'm not sure who would be the best person to address this. Possibly Emily?
Yep, I happily can jump in. If anybody else has commentary, feel free. There are a ton of tools out there, but everyone uses Energy Star Portfolio Manager because it's a known entity. This isn't a type of tool that folks take a lot of joy in spending the time using. It doesn't mean they don't see the value of it. It doesn't mean that they don't know they have to do it, but it can be a tedious task. There's data input. It's not their favorite thing. Because most folks in most buildings are using it, it's just the easiest tool. And to be honest, it's free. And the EPA does a really nice job of taking feedback into that tool and editing it as needed. Now, there are tons of other tools out there. They all cost money. And unless they show a competitive advantage or have a reason to do something above and beyond what they're already getting out of Portfolio Manager, there's really no reason to do it. A lot of commercial real estate firms have their own internal tools that they have either built or paid to have built or pay an implementer to manage. That happens quite a bit. And what they're doing with that is taking it beyond a Portfolio Manager. They really want to get into the weeds on how their janitorial services are stacking up against their portfolio. There's a lot of SaaS projects out there that can help, again, these commercial real estate companies benchmark across all their portfolios, so it doesn't just look at one particular utility space, but it can look across maybe even the entire United States. So there are tools, pros and cons on them. Energy Star Portfolio Manager is the real big one that everyone uses, though.
Thanks, Emily. And I think we're going to have to wrap. We've had a fantastic conversation here, so I want to thank our panelists so much for their time, and thank you all for your questions. Just a brief couple takeaways: that we're seeing new opportunities to use benchmarking data to drive efficiency as the number of ordinances that cities are implementing increases, and as we start to see value from the situations where that already exists. And we need multiple stakeholders to be involved to make sure the data is accurate and that it can be used in meaningful ways. So again, a great thank you to our panelists. I hope you all have enjoyed this webinar, and please feel free to contact me if you have additional questions or want to continue following up on questions you've asked throughout the session. So thank you so much.